Myth versus reality. They tell you the Wisdom House was a beacon of enlightenment, the medieval Silicon Valley minus the coffee addiction. Brilliant minds, sipping dates juice under latticed windows, debating Aristotle, translating Greek into Arabic with monk-like precision, while perfume floated in the air and the caliph himself popped in just to nod approvingly. Sounds neat, doesn't it? A cerebral Disneyland, dust-free and pure. Well, reality smells like sheep and mildew, literally. You are living inside a giant mouthful of old parchment, and the teeth are the shelves. And those clever men? Half of them are rewriting the same sentence for the third time because the ink bled through. The other half are arguing whether Ptolemy's stellar coordinates are still valid, while chewing pistachios that taste faintly of sand and mouse droppings. You are leaning on a brass railing, trying not to step on whatever insect population survives in this upper floor attic. The air is thin, but full of powdered leather flakes, an empire's intellectual pride reduced to a mild respiratory hazard. Somewhere below, in the more ornate halls, a team of translators are giving birth to Arabic words for hypotenuse and perigee, wincing at Greek vowels they can't pronounce without spitting. It is the year 850. The Abbasid Caliphate is at its peak, and here you are in the top floor of history's most hyped library, with a massive yellow brass astrolabe in front of you, recording the crawl of stars like you're timing a snail race. The astrolabe itself is gorgeous, in the way all uselessly complex instruments are. It has more little brass knobs than you have fingers. Every engraved line, latitude, longitude, ecliptic, is crisp and glinting, but also faintly greasy from decades of hands coated with lamp oil and sweat. You turn one plate, hear the whispering grind, and remember that this thing will probably outlive you, the empire, and half the constellations it's charting. But it will never predict sandstorms or rats eating manuscripts in the night. The desert wind comes through a cracked shutter. It's not cinematic. It's cold and smells like camel, because camel caravans pass below the street, and the wind catches their scent. You tug your robe tighter. The robe itself is a hand-me-down from a scholar who died last year. Not tragically, just from general wear and tear of being alive in the 9th century. It's a little too short in the sleeves, so your forearms feel the chill. You look around at piles of silk and parchment scrolls. Silk is for fancy projects, astronomy, medicine, philosophy. Parchment is for more mundane texts, tax records, laws, copies of theological debates you wish got lost in transcription. The ink stains are like little islands on an ocean, and your brain keeps tracking how many of them are shaped suspiciously, like a dead goat. The myth says everyone here is a genius. Reality, some are geniuses, some are dangerously bored bureaucrats, and some are here because their cousin needed to stash them somewhere safe after they insulted the wrong vizier. And safe is relative. The stairwell down is narrow enough for one man. If a fire starts, you'll be roasted slowly, like lamb in a clay oven. You've smelled that smell. You've eaten that lamb. You'd rather not become it. Someone coughs below. It's a wet cough, the kind that tells you this person's lungs are more library dust than flesh now. Your astrolabe's shadow shifts with the oil lamplight, and you notice again the slow motion of stars across its plate. You jot a number on a scrap. The scrap used to be a letter from an Armenian merchant, something about walnut shipments. Now, it's astronomy. Recycling exists because paper doesn't. Let's break the fantasy a little further. Wisdom House is not a monolithic building where every scholar is your close friend in a quest for truth. It's a network of rooms, courtyards, cold corridors, and storage vaults. Some scrolls are so rotted they disintegrate when touched. Some shelves are simply crates stacked in corners. There's an apprentice somewhere tasked with catching silverfish before they eat the mathematics section, and he's losing badly. The Caliph, Al-Mutawakkil, right now, has allowed funding for this truth factory, mostly because it makes him look powerful, cosmopolitan and pious, depending on which ambassador or poet is visiting. You can smell his generosity. It's the aroma of lamp oil, because without it you'd be working in darkness. But you can also smell its limits, cheap leather binding on books instead of expensive cedar boxes, because budgets are budgets, even in an empire. You run your fingers along one rolled manuscript. The texture is brittle. The words inside might be Galen's medical theories or some Syrian translation of Plato. You won't know until you risk unrolling it, and risk is real. One wrong tug, and the scholar's lifetime of scribbling becomes a pile of crumbs. And then, of course, you get blamed. There's no "it was already brittle" defense here. Night in Baghdad isn't silent. From your window sliver you hear blacksmith hammers, somewhere far down the avenue, probably making hinges or blades, neither of which you can chart on your astrolabe. You smell bread baking. Someone's midnight business. You envy them, the simplicity of dough compared to the complexity of star charts. Bread doesn't care if Mars is in retrograde. Bread just rises, or it doesn't. From the street, a drunken poet sings half-remembered verses. His voice cracks, a reminder that artistic inspiration locks lips with lack of sobriety. You imagine if he wandered in here, he'd think the astrolabe is a giant serving plate. Your eyes drift to the shelves again. You try to count. Thousands, tens of thousands. Numbers in your head collapse under the weight of reality. You shouldn't be counting books. You should be reading them. But reading in this cold loft means stiff fingers, lamp smoke slowly poisoning you, and occasional interruptions from rats suspecting you might drop crumbs. Reality isn't the tidy rows of knowledge you saw in some romantic painting. It's this: half-catalogued stacks, missing pages, duplicate texts, but with contradictory translations, and sometimes deliberate errors inserted for political amusement. You once found Plato's Republic copied with nudges in the wording to make it sound like supporting monarchy. The astrolabe's brass catches another flicker of light as a cloud passes over the moon. You adjust your robe again. You're supposed to be plotting star positions for some treatise requested by an astronomer in the caliph's court. A treatise that will take months because the stars are slow, and so is everyone else. You think, who will read this after you're dead? Maybe some future scholar will glance at your neat notations and imagine a disciplined, serene night. They'll never smell the camel wind, feel the brittle pages, or hear the muffled coughing from below. Somewhere in the depths of this building, water drips in a system. It's soothing in theory, but here it's just a reminder the roof leaks. Baghdad gets rain sometimes. When it does, everyone runs around like it's the end of times, because water plus parchment equals mush. You remember one panic last year when rain hit unexpectedly. 4 grown men sprinting with armfuls of books, slamming doors, cursing prayers to saints they neither believed nor disbelieved. And the myth also forgets, knowledge here isn't free-flowing. There are gatekeepers. You don't just wander in and touch books. Someone decides who gets access, what can be copied, what can be locked in storage, because it's politically dangerous or religiously questionable. That Greek philosopher's manuscript, gone from the shelves last month, quietly sent to a private collection owned by someone in power. You glance at a silk manuscript beside you. Its white shimmer in lamplight is almost luxurious, but the smell is faintly musty, because even silk collects memories. Your astrolabe's measurement is done for now. You check your scrap, scribble some coordinates, and lean back. From down the hallway, footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Probably the night custodian whose main job is to make sure nobody lights the place on fire or steals anything tonight. He's not subtle, because subtlety isn't his job. He walks past, nods at you, and keeps going, his oil lamp swinging like a pendulum. You imagine future historians calling this place the beating heart of medieval intellectual life. And sure, mostly it beats dust into your lungs. They'll gloss over the tedious hours spent copying diagrams nobody will check for accuracy. They won't mention the ink shortage last spring that resulted in half-finished translations of Euclid being stored until someone remembered them months later. You run your finger along the astrolabe's edge, careful to avoid its sharper brass corners. The constellations here are crude outlines, nowhere near as fanciful as the ones in illustrated manuscripts. You know their names in Arabic and Greek. Some you even know in Persian. But you also know no star will change a plague season or feed the city's poor. The wind picks up, rattling the shutters. For a moment you wonder if someone below is arguing again. Debates get loud here. A translation team might be fighting over whether sphere should be rendered as ball or heaven's orb. You've seen men nearly come to blows over a single adjective. And part of the reality too. This library is full of human egos. No matter the grandeur, it's still a workplace. There's gossip about who got promoted to chief translator. There's resentment when someone's book gets more lavish binding. There's the constant rumour about which scholar might get invited to dine with the caliph. And then there's you, stuck in the loft, thinking about camel smell and brass shadows. You check the stars again. No rush, empire's end, but stars take their sweet time. Myth versus reality. They tell you the House of Wisdom was like Hogwarts for grown-ups, except Islamic, scholarly, and with less wand-waving and more precise math. They conjure images of serene sages in silken robes, gently debating Aristotle while sipping sherbet. They don't tell you about the sand in your teeth, the stink of camel dung wafting up from the courtyard, and the fact that half the astronomical data is written in handwriting that looks like someone sneezed mid-ink stroke. You are in the loft because apparently you look like someone who can be trusted not to spill date syrup on priceless manuscripts. The loft has its own climate, hot still air during the day, cold drafts after sunset, all suffused with the faint odour of old animal skin. A reminder that every parchment here used to be on the back of something that bleated. Shelves loom over you and under you, the vertical stacking designed by some architect who thought gravity was merely a suggestion. Some shelves have scrolls so brittle you can hear them crumbling from across the room. Others are stuffed with new translations, their gold leaf bindings quietly bragging from the shadows like smug jewelers. You angle the brass-starred disc, tracing the slow shift of the constellations. The brass is polished enough to catch dim lamplight, but also scratched enough to have its own history. Every tiny nick is from decades of hands and eyes, trying to catch the heavens in a circle the size of a large dinner plate. You know the sky will keep moving whether you write it down or not. But the caliph likes records. His office likes proof that the universe is being monitored, as if God himself needs quarterly reports. The rooftop breeze slides through the window slits, carrying with it whispers from the courtyard below. Someone is arguing over the price of papyrus rolls. Someone else is swearing at a donkey that insists on blocking the gate. It's amazing what counts as the soundtrack of a golden age. You imagine tourists centuries later romanticizing this moment, the enlightened capital, the apex of learning, the shimmering desert city under a wise ruler. They won't mention that scholars have to swat flies off their ink pots. And part of the reality too, this library is full of human egos. No matter the grandeur, it's still a workplace. There's gossip about who got promoted to chief translator. There's resentment when someone's book gets more lavish binding. There's the constant rumour about which scholar might get invited to dine with the caliph. And then there's you, stuck in the loft, thinking about camel smell and brass shadows. You check the stars again. No rush. Empire's end. But stars take their sweet time. The brass disc creaks faintly as you adjust it, and you realise your fingertips are coated in a mix of dust and oil. Oil from innumerable other fingers, now all presumably dead. If sentimentality is supposed to bloom in moments like this, it must have gotten lost on the way, because you mostly think about washing your hands. Somewhere below, two translators are engaged in a heated debate about whether a certain Greek phrase means spherical or slightly oblong. Voices bouncing off the stone walls like less romantic echoes of genius. You wonder how much of the empire's intellectual output is actually born from petty pride. My interpretation is better than yours, rather than any noble pursuit. The night wind has a way of sneaking in sideways, gently pressing against your robe so it flutters just enough to be annoying. Sand grains pepper the floorboards in irregular bursts, as if the desert is trying to reclaim its property. The loft's lamp sputters, its wick curling in protest against the chill. Down below, you catch sight of a young scribe carrying a stack of freshly copied texts, bound in dyed leather, his expression equal parts exhaustion and reverence. He's probably imagining future generations praising his perfect calligraphy, unaware that someone will eventually spill tea on it and blame him. Your stomach growls, reminding you that you skipped dinner to finish charting tonight's constellation positions. Not that dinner is much to look forward to. Cold bread, suspiciously chewy mutton, and dates that taste faintly of dust. Romanticized history never tastes of dust, so the future will probably edit that detail out. In their mind, learning smells like jasmine, and wisdom ages like wine. In yours, it smells like musty parchment and tastes like you're chewing on yesterday's sandstorm. Somewhere deeper in the labyrinth of shelves you hear the scrape of a stool being dragged. That sound belongs to Nasir, an irritable old mathematician who insists on explaining planetary motion louder than necessary. He doesn't even need to talk to anyone. He lectures the books themselves. Last week he dropped a bundle of scrolls and accused the heir of interfering with his calculations. He also insists that the Caliph should double his stipend, citing the immeasurable importance of his work, which, coincidentally, nobody understands well enough to argue against. You look back at the disk, line up another star, and jot down its coordinates in cramped handwriting. The quill squeaks faintly against the parchment, like it's protesting being used at this hour. Your eyes start to ache, but you keep going. The city outside hums quietly, probably the hum of creaking carts, muffled calls, and that ever-present wind. Somewhere, deep in the palace, the Caliph might be sipping something sweet and warm, not thinking about the scholars currently freezing their fingers off to make the heavens legible. The thing about empire at its height is that it's a height for the people writing palace records, not necessarily for the people stacking books in dim lofts. You've heard stories about armies pushing the frontier, about diplomats in silk negotiating trade routes, about architects designing mosques bigger than imagination. But those stories always shave off the texture, the slivers of realism that smell bad, itch in the night, and leave you dusty. That's what's missing from the myth. The fact that brilliance lives alongside boredom. The schedule is measured not in wars or discoveries, but in hours between meals and the occasional errand to fetch new ink. A moth drifts dangerously close to your lamp flame, pauses mid-flight, then decides you're too boring and veers away. You watch it vanish into darkness, briefly jealous of its freedom. At least moths don't have to attend committee meetings about the optimal organization of manuscript categories. Those meetings last hours, revolving around whether astrology belongs next to astronomy or should be safely banished near miscellaneous speculative arts. You hear another cough from below, possibly Yahya the copyist, whose lungs sound like they've been inhaling powdered plaster for decades. He's one of those men who knows exactly how far his voice carries in the library, and deploys it to remind everyone that he's alive and working. A necessary skill, given that young assistants sometimes forget he's in the corner, until he erupts into an oddly timed anecdote about Alexander the Great. Nobody can tell whether he thinks Alexander's conquests were impressive, or just a logistical nightmare. Your star disk catches the faint reflection of the lamp again, as you shift it to track Aldebaran. Its position is stable, unhurried. Sometimes you wonder if the stars are smug, watching empires flame, strangle themselves with bureaucracy, and collapse into sand while they stay exactly where they started, give or take a fraction of a degree. Aldebaran isn't going to write a smug poem about its endurance, but if it did, it would probably outsell half the texts in this building. That thought drifts to another. How many of these manuscripts will outlive you? Outlive the Caliph? Outlive the House of Wisdom itself? You've heard rumours that the Mongols are somewhere to the east, like a distant storm building, but people dismiss them because distant storms never seem relevant until they're flooding your courtyard. You shake your head, trying not to spiral into apocalyptic fantasies. The Empire is strong, they say. Translation work continues without interruption, they say. People have said similar things right before other empires stopped existing. The loft has a narrow window slit, angled toward the northwest, letting you see a slice of sky. The city's lights, mostly oil lamps, twinkle unevenly below, like they're imitating the stars, but without the same discipline. A stray shout echoes up, and you think you hear someone laugh nervously. Maybe another scholar just found out their text was briefly misplaced in the archives, which translates to having been used as a makeshift table for some visiting merchant. You wish you could pretend scholarly respect is universal, but here, as in most places, it's conditional and frequently negotiable. You flex your fingers, feel the stiffness from hours of writing. The quill has worn a groove in your thumb pad. You could change position, take a break, stretch. But there's something hypnotic about staying locked in place while the stars pull slow patterns across your instruments. Somewhere deep in the palace, decisions are being made that will ripple out to affect trade, war, and the library's funding. You imagine one such ripple washing over you, maybe in the form of a sudden demand to produce celestial charts faster, to present them at some elaborate banquet so the caliph can nod wisely while swallowing roasted lamb. You tug at your collar, trying to ease the chafing. The wind keeps finding tiny nether cracks to slither through, chilling the sweat on your skin from earlier in the day. The brass disc sits between you and the parchment like a silent judge. You aim it toward another target, mark your chart, and wonder, as always, whether anyone will still care about those marks in a century. History likes to tell stories about great accuracy, but doesn't linger on the fact that accuracy is meaningless if the record itself gets burned, misplaced, or reinterpreted by someone with lousy eyesight. The lamplight flickers again, threatening to fade. You instinctively glance toward the oil level, then remember that replenishing it means climbing down and crossing half the library to grovel for a refill. Groveling is an art here. It's important to ask without implying that someone else should have noticed beforehand. Everyone here is fiercely protective of their dignity, even if they're wearing ink-stained sleeves and coughing up dust. From somewhere below, there's the muffled thunk of a heavy tome being accidentally dropped. It's followed by silence dense enough to suggest somebody is pretending nothing happened. You picture the tome, probably an expensive, finely bound copy of Galen's medical theories, lying half open on the floor, its pages straining from the unexpected impact. And in that moment, the myth dissolves entirely. An empire's height is built on human hands, and hands drop things. You glance one last time at the brass disc's etched lines, then over at the shelves heavy with knowledge, in 3 languages, sometimes 4. Each shelf has its own microclimate, its own smell, its own ecosystem of mold, dust, or insects. This is the part nobody puts in pretty illustrations. The Empire's learning is not pristine. It's mortal, touchable, sometimes uncomfortably damp. And you, stuck in the loft, will keep writing as long as the lamp holds out. Myth versus reality. They tell you the House of Wisdom was a jewel. Cool marble colonnades, robed scholars gliding silently, thoughts as pure as the desert dawn. What they don't tell you, thought smells faintly of goat hide, unwashed hair, and the places mice die when no one notices for a week. Your lungs know it before your mind does. The myth is airbrushed parchment. The reality is a cracked inkpot spilling across a month's worth of translation, and someone swearing in 3 dialects of Arabic, because the Syriac term for hypotenuse refuses to be tamed into neat grammar. You are on the top floor, the loft all the ambitious scribes pretend they don't want, because the stairs get steeper near the end and hold the heat of the day like grudge-bearing stone. Outside, the desert exhales. The night wind smells of iron and dust, finding its way in through screens warped by years of expansion and contraction in the brutal sun. Somewhere below, a cat stalks between scroll racks, chasing a phantom rustle that may or may not be edible. Upstairs, your job is to keep the lamp lit, your ink flowing, and your brain tethered to the cruelly slow crawl of the heavens over the brass planisphere dominating your table. The thing is heavy enough to brain a caliph, which you suspect is why it's chained to the desk. They call it an astrolabe, but it behaves more like an anchor for your evening. The stars are obviously in no hurry. They cheat the impatient, pausing almost imperceptibly, sliding in increments that mock the human eye. You plot their progress anyway. Some part of you feels that if you stop, the sky might seize the opportunity to slide off its hinges entirely. All around you, the shelves sag under their own pretensions. They hold Greek philosophers whose words were carried across empires on the backs of donkeys that cared nothing for Aristotle. Persian verse that survived border raids and careless copying. Indian mathematics annotated with Arabic commentary written in margins so narrow you suspect their authors enjoyed a challenge best described as hostile. It's not tidy. The pages breathe and warp. Ink bleeds where the rain once pried open the roof. Leather bindings sweat in the summer so badly that the first hot day brings with it the faint reek of tannery vats. You glance one last time at the brass disc's etched lines, Then over at the shelves, heavy with knowledge in 3 languages, sometimes 4. Each shelf has its own microclimate, its own smell, its own ecosystem of mold, dust, or insects. This is the part nobody puts in pretty illustrations. The Empire's learning is not pristine. It's mortal, touchable, sometimes uncomfortably damp. And you, stuck in the loft, will keep writing as long as the lamp holds out. The oil in the lamp is already turning bitter in the heat. Yes, even fire can smell wrong here. It's animal fat from somewhere far enough away that you can imagine it had a life before this, grazing peacefully until a cook or a scribe supplier slit its throat in the name of illumination. The wick spits in quiet protest every time you lean too close with your reed pen. Your fingers, by the way, are no longer entirely skim-coloured. The outer knuckles are silvered faintly from a week's worth of brushing against the astrolabe's brass arc. And everything else, from nails to the lines in your palm, is blackened with ink that will never fully come out. Downstairs, someone is arguing about Ptolemy's errors, each voice pitching higher, like an enthusiastic market haggler. You can guess the script by now. One insists on the eccentric circles, another swears the Indian tables are superior, and a third mutters about the tedious necessity of cross-checking with Chinese records. Somewhere in Baghdad, a drunken poet is improvising verses about a wine jug's shape, but here the intoxicants are angular diameters and declination tables. You shift on the low stool. It wobbles, because every flat surface in this building is either warped by heat or gnawed by time. Your thigh muscles complain about hours of stillness, and your back has that warm, dull pain that sits somewhere between fatigue and warning. The kind of ache that makes you fantasize about the cold tile floor downstairs, only to remember that it's crowded with duplicators hunched over sheets, producing smudged copies for whichever patron paid in gold dinars this month. Someone once told you that every page copied here is an act of conquest over ignorance. Romantic thought, until you realize how many of those pages get palmed with greasy fingers, dropped in the mud, or simply misfiled until both the text and the paper dissolve into anonymity. Genius and garbage are both written on human hands, and hands drop things. Your reed pen squeaks faintly as it moves, a sound impossible to capture in any Golden Age watercolour. In the warmer hours, the ink dried too quickly. Now in the cooler night, it hesitates and beads, daring you to smear them. When you blink, the shadows at the corners of your vision shift. You tell yourself it's the flame flickering, not something alive. But remember the cat downstairs. It has colleagues. Insects don't recognize scholarship as a higher calling. The books here are a layered biography of violence and rescue. You've handled papyrus from centuries back, flaking in your fingers like the skin of someone dying of thirst. There's vellum that's been scraped clean and reused so often that the ghost of the older text stares through the new like an accusation. Once in a while you find marginal notes in a hand clearly writing under duress. Faint tremors in every letter, ink pooling where the scribe paused too long. For romance-minded visitors, these imperfections are charming. For you, they're reminders of how often knowledge survives by accident more than design. The air gets thicker with each passing hour. Heat doesn't rise here. It sits, squats, dares you to breathe through your mouth. Your tongue tastes like dust filtered through lamb grease. Even swallowing has a grainy edge to it. Somewhere near your feet, a beetle is making progress toward a gap between stacked scroll tubes. It moves with the stubborn confidence of something that has been dodging human feet for generations. Below, the arguments have shifted from astronomy to translation technique. You can catch only fragments. Someone is deriding a rival's rendering of Galen's Latin into Arabic via Syriac. You know better than to interfere. Translation disputes here can go from academic to personal at unsettling speed. And you're fond of your kneecaps. You pause to stretch your fingers, watching your knuckles pop like distant stones under a wheel. The sensation is more relief than pain, but it sings with the reminder that the body you inhabit will not last as long as even the most poorly stored manuscript. Your skin will rot faster than the ink. You wonder if future scholars will even remember your name, or only curse you for a blot you leave tonight. There is, after all, no glamour in being a small cog in the empire's great intellect machine. Poets write about caliphs, chroniclers name the patrons. Occasionally the translator gets a footnote. The copyist, forgotten before the ink's fully dry. Yet here you are, still drawing lines on the star map, noting positions of light that died before your grandfather was born, as if the record will hold the universe accountable for its slow-motion drift. The astrolabe's brass cools under your fingertips. You trace the gridwork almost unconsciously, an idle prayer to geometry. Outside, the wind carries the distant thudding of a night watchman's patrol, each strike of his staff against stone a pulse reminding you that down there, money and power move in their own orbits. Up here, the only economy is the trade between fatigue and stubbornness. Your stomach complains it's been hours since the date and nut bread you gnawed earlier, hard enough to chip a molar. Hunger in this loft feels different. It's stale, like the air, like the knowledge that tomorrow night will be exactly this again. You keep your eyes on the brass and the ink, because if you look too often toward the shelves, the sheer volume of it all chills your resolve. There is more to copy than there is life to give it. Sometimes you think about the chain of people who've touched these texts, philosopher to scribe to merchant to translator to you. Each link in that chain shaves a little off the original thought, adds a smudge, a misreading, an entire ownership seal proclaiming a caliph's taste in learning. If ideas were livestock, these are the descendants after 20 generations of blind breeding. Still impressive to the untrained eye, but you've seen the inbreeding up close. A faint chittering enters your awareness. You glance at the dark rafters overhead. The Empire's investment in scholarship extends to rodent housing, apparently. Somewhere up there, tiny feet navigate beams as confidently as you've navigated marginalia all night. You keep staring at your work to pretend it's unimportant. The oil in the lamp sloshes softly as you adjust it. The sound is more comfort than the light. It's proof that you can keep going another hour. Against your will, you calculate how many hours are left until dawn, until the heat rises and makes the ink run differently, until the loft becomes a slow oven. Even nights can be punishing here, but the sun is another empire entirely. What keeps you anchored, ironically, is the very monotony that others might loathe. Charting the skies, tracing the same circles night after night, has its own narcotic rhythm. You can lose yourself in the numbering, but converting from one calendar to another, the precise noting of a star's altitude. If the cat downstairs is the library's enforcer, chasing creeping chaos, you are its metronome, beating time in ink and brass. Somewhere far beyond this building, in the Black Sea port towns or in dusty caravan stops, a copy of something you touched will rest in a foreigner's hands. Maybe it will inspire, maybe it will be used to level a wobbly table. Your influence stops the moment the book leaves your bench. And yet, we persist. Here, now, scribbling in a pool of light that smells of fat and smoke, chasing lost civilizations across the heavens one tiny dot at a time. And there it is again, that sarcastic voice in your head, one you've cultivated as both shield and entertainment. Civilization, it says. You're stewing in goat grease, inhaling mold spores, and trading your eyesight for a future historian's footnote. You dip the pen again. The voice isn't wrong, but the stars tonight are especially sharp. Cold little truths, their positions fixed in ways human empires never are. The building groans somewhere in its bones. Maybe the beams are shrinking in the cooler air, or maybe the House of Wisdom really does shift in its sleep, tired of the weight of words. The sound carries through the shelves like a whisper from a giant. No one listens. Listening too hard to an old building is another way to go insane. You mark your chart again, steady hand, cramped shoulders. From time to time you remember the stories outsiders tell of Baghdad's intellectual glory, places like this painted in the glow of reason and art. The stingy details smoothed over. They'd never describe the way your eyes itch from dust, or how often you've had to keep your throat cleared so the next line of numbers comes out without a cough splattering the parchment. Heroic ages, they say. They forget the heroes had runny noses and lower back problems. Your lamp smokes a little. You fan it with your notes, a dangerous move, but the smoke is as oily as the air, and you're tired enough to risk it. The flame shivers but survives. Your hand smells faintly of singed fibre from the wick trimming you had to do earlier. That particular scent that, once learned, never leaves the memory. It strikes you, not for the first time, that all of this could vanish. One fire, one sack by some warlord with a grudge, and the Empire's great library becomes ash. You would be lucky to escape with your skin, unlucky enough to carry the knowledge of what was lost. Building this pyramid of paper and skin takes centuries. Destroying it would take until sunrise. It's a thought you push away, but never very far. You listen again to the voices below, now dulled by distance and the thick night. Someone laughs, coughing halfway through. Dry lungs, probably from leaning too long over a brazier. You feel a muted kinship for all of them, even the pompous debaters. We are, every one of us here, trading our strength for something that may never outlive the next political purging. The stars don't care. Neither do the cats. The pen scratches again, a stubborn heartbeat in the quiet. Ink, brass, and the faint pulse of wind through warped screens. Your constants. There's comfort in their predictability, even if it's the kind of comfort a prisoner might feel counting the bricks in his wall. The work continues, because stopping would be admitting the futility you already suspect. And so, you add another careful mark to the chart. Myth versus reality. They told you it was an age of enlightenment, didn't they? Gold domes gleaming over Baghdad. Philosophers debating infinity under perfumed lamps. Somewhere between Euclid and divine revelation. You've seen the miniatures that survive. Men with halos of intellect. Ink-stained yet radiant. Reality smells like burnt glue and sheepskin. The air tastes like copper dust. Scholars cough blood into their manuscripts and wipe it off with the same sleeve that will one day wipe off their names too. You can almost hear the propaganda merchants whispering across the centuries. The Golden Age. Sure, everything shines when polished with nostalgia and the bones of unpaid scribes. You are one of those scribes. Well, technically, a junior observer of celestial mechanics, which sounds far more glamorous when recited at evening prayer. In truth, you scrape ink from worn parchment under a draft that's equal parts sand and regret. The House of Wisdom wraps around you like a mechanical lung, breathing, wheezing, expelling air that smells of oil and dead moths. The lamps flicker in rhythm with your pulse, and the ceiling above, painted with faded constellations, sheds flakes like the sky's dandruff. You'd laugh, but that requires optimism. It's the year 850, give or take the odd miscopied numeral. The Abbasid Caliphate has officially reached its intellectual Everest, right before leaning over the edge to admire gravity. Outside these walls, the Tigris hums with markets, gossip, and the occasional drowned tacksman. Inside, time moves differently. Time is the enemy you can bargain with, only through ink and calculation. The brass astrolabe before you ticks like a reluctant clock, catching faint lamplight, recording the indifferent progress of stars that would keep moving even if all of Baghdad went dark. Which, spoiler alert, it eventually will. They call this level of the library the top chamber, a flattering way of saying attic, the place where heat gathers in the day and ghosts gather at night. Scholars seldom come this high. The ones who do are either zealously devoted or socially exiled. You, of course, are both. Your supervisor, an old man whose eyebrows have evolved into independent deities, claims the high air clarifies thought. He says it builds character, the same way starvation clarifies appetite. His faith in altitude remains strong, his dentures less so. The myth says the House of Wisdom is where ideas are born, but you know it's mostly where they come to die in perfect penmanship. Translation projects from Greece, Persia, and India, pile higher than your morale. Sometimes you copy texts so old their language feels alien, little bones of knowledge excavated from civilizations that also once thought themselves immortal. You wonder if their scribes sat like you, hunched over, squinting, pretending that accuracy could outlast empires. Probably the human condition, bureaucratic persistence amid cosmic indifference. There's a specific odour to old ink, iron gall, and vinegar. oxidized arrogance. When it hits your nose, it's like sniffing the ghost of ambition. Your hands, permanently tarnished, look older than their owner. The skin cracks around your knuckles. Flakes drift into your manuscripts like a snow of epidermal confession. You think about the students downstairs, those privileged souls debating Aristotle's metaphysics while sipping mint. You used to sit with them until a minor argument about the motion of celestial spheres and the metaphorical weight of divine essence turned physical. You lost teeth, gained solitude. Fair trade? The brass astrolabe occupies most of your table, a monstrous instrument of logic pretending to domesticate the night sky. You turn it slowly, each rotation a small rebellion against entropy. The heavens, though, remain indifferent, each star pinned in its invisible orbit, moving with mathematical cruelty. Below, Baghdad twinkles with oil lamps, each a microcosm of optimism. Above, the eternal glitter of cosmic bureaucracy. God's spreadsheet never crashes. Tonight, you're charting the course of Mars. The planet's reddish glint peeks through the lattice windows like a wound that won't clot. You record its movement in careful Latin mixed with Arabic annotation, the hybrid tongue of compromise. The pen squeals across vellum, a sound like a mosquito caught in confession. Every letter you form is a miniature monument to tedium. But what's the alternative? Prayer? Murder? Neither option yields accurate coordinates. Downstairs, voices murmur, philosophers arguing over syllogisms, the rhythmic chant of students reciting formulas half understood. The intellectually devout sound suspiciously similar to beggars rehearsing gratitude. Occasionally, a burst of laughter climbs the stairwell. Young minds still convinced learning is immune to politics. You could tell them stories. About your colleague Rashid, who calculated eclipses too precisely. Apparently that was heresy. The state prefers approximations. They leave more room for divine intervention. A mouse darts across your chart, its tail brushing calculations worth a month's rations. You stare at it, too tired for anger. The library's cats patrol occasionally, sleek saboteurs who believe parchment is merely flattened prey. One such feline lounges on a shelf nearby, tail flicking in the rhythm of disdain. You envy its detachment. The cat doesn't care who rules, who burns, who translates whom. Cats are the true philosophers. Their contempt is universal. The myth says Baghdad was built as a perfect circle, the city of peace. The truth, it looks perfect only on parchment. Step outside the palace walls, and the geometry dissolves into open sewage and half-remembered prayers. Peace, after all, was a limited resource, heavily taxed. The Caliph's court sponsors your library not out of love for knowledge, but for control of it. Information is power, ink the cheapest weapon. You're a foot soldier, armed with a quill, marching through the morass of memory. Sometimes emissaries arrive from distant lands, Byzantines in perfume-ruined armour, Persians wrapped in philosophy, pale envoys from far-off Cathay bringing paper smoother than the lies of courtiers. They all want one thing: prestige by proximity, to claim their civilization once spoke to yours. You appreciate the irony, translators acting as cultural morticians, embalming dead ideas in new alphabets. Each conversion costs meaning, like money changing hands through too many middlemen. Concepts blur, metaphors mutate. What remains is noble-looking gibberish, filed neatly in your archives. Outside, a sandstorm broods on the horizon. You can taste it in the air, metallic, electric, biblical. The guards downstairs begin sealing shutters. Librarians rush to protect scrolls from moisture that hasn't even arrived yet. You, though, remain still. You've seen worse. The night the roof leaked molten rain from an oil lamp fire. The morning someone confused a philosopher for a heretic, then reversed the decision mid-execution. Bureaucracy moves in cycles, much like Mars. Your lamp guttering draws the cat's lazily reflective eyes. The flame trembles in rhythm with your own fatigue. Somewhere below, the astronomer Yahya is lecturing a patron about heavenly symmetry, insisting that the universe was built on ratios of compassion. You nearly drop your pen laughing. Ratios of compassion? Tell that to the orphans outside counting dinars by the light of their mother's bracelets. Compassion is rarely measurable, And if it were, the caliph's treasurer would have taxed it already. It's quiet now, just the whisper of parchment turning, the faint whine of the astrolabe gears, and your breath counting seconds. The ink has thickened. You stir it with a reed. The smell of vinegar hisses up like a reprimand. You think about what time really means here. The scholars downstairs argue that time is God's architecture. You suspect it's more like a landlord, indifferent, occasionally cruel, always collecting rent. Still, you record it faithfully. Rebellions are impractical on an hourly wage. The stars outside shift, imperceptibly, yet mercilessly. Their light filters through thrown dust, turning celestial precision into muddy suggestion. You track it anyway, drawing neat circles for objects that never cared to be simplified. Your pulse matches the tick of your machine. You wonder if future historians will call this dedication or surrender. Sometimes they're synonyms. You lean back, vertebrae cracking like cheap pottery. Below your desk lies a pile of discarded notes. Some contain brilliant thoughts lost to fatigue, others confessions written in the margins. We chase truth, but trip over footnotes. Accuracy feels like faith after enough nights without sleep. Do not copy errors. They have families. Everyone leaves jokes on their failures, maybe to humanize despair. The next scribe will find them, shrug, and repeat the cycle. You recall your first days here, the awe, the reverence, the promise of proximity to greatness. A future of scholarship rather than servitude. But knowledge, you've learned, is an exhausting kind of wealth. It multiplies responsibility but rarely alleviates hunger. You still line up for bread at dawn with starving poets who recite verses to distract the ration officers. The only difference between a poet and an astronomer, really, is that your delusions have coordinates. Through the open screen drift the sounds of Baghdad asleep, or pretending to. Dogs bark, merchants dream of unpaid debts, patrols clank by with torches like little comets. Farther away, the muezzin's call perforates the night with mathematical precision. You glance at your astrolabe again, whispering the time it predicts. 2 minutes off. The heavens don't care for local schedules. You set down the pen, flexing fingers that haven't felt softness in years. The papyrus edges have toughened them. Even your nails look written on. You rub your eyes, and the darkness flares in colours. Fatigue fireworks. The cat yawns, revealing a mouth sharper than any argument you've ever lost. You envy that simplicity. Hunger, sleep, repetition. No illusions about meaning. Cats will inherit the earth once men debate themselves extinct. A low rumble shakes the shelves. Not thunder, but a caravan crossing the bridge below. The floorboards groan in empathy. You imagine the traders, swaddled in dust, ferrying spices, silks, truths, and lies in equal measure. Knowledge travels slower than commerce anyway. Most civilizations collapse before their best ideas get translated properly. You make a note to include that in the margins, in case the next empire appreciates sarcasm. The myth says Baghdad's scholars used logic to reconcile faith and science. The truth, they used logic to stay employed. Every theorem ends with a prayer when the funding comes from the caliph's cousin. Theological loopholes multiply faster than a mathematician's anxieties. You've watched brilliant men recant discoveries as easily as sneezing, all for the comfort of continued respiration. The stars may reveal God's order, but only after you get clearance from the palace. You glance toward the narrow door, wood swollen from years of humidity and missed opportunities. Beyond it, the stairs spiral down through the labyrinth of scholars and guards, then finally to the courtyard where lamps float like captive stars on their oil bowls. Once, in youthful folly, you climbed to the roof to watch a lunar eclipse. The city below looked infinite. The shadow on the moon resembled a stain, maybe from some forgotten celestial scandal. You wrote a note comparing the two. Your supervisor later burned it, declaring analogy a sinful habit of poets. He was right. You never stopped writing them. Tonight, though, no moon, just the dry shimmer of constellations that ancient Greeks named after their own insecurities. You think of those astronomers, Hipparchus scribbling under another empire's lantern, just as convinced he was deciphering eternity. Maybe he had a cat too. Maybe he also wondered if cataloguing the infinite was a creative form of delusion. You find that thought comforting. Insanity is less lonely across centuries. A gust rattles the shutters. Sand creeps through gaps, smudging ink into constellations of its own. You resist the urge to interpret them. Divination got 2 scholars hanged last year. Too accurate, apparently. The Caliphate prefers ignorance with paperwork. You dab carefully at the page, preserving as much clarity as possible. Each blot becomes another celestial artifact in the archaeology of insomnia. You sip water from a brass cup gone green inside, tasting centuries of unwashed ambition. The noise of the city has faded, replaced by the endless whisper of night. You write again. Short, deliberate marks, charting movement that feels too slow to matter. But it matters to you. Or at least, it used to. This was supposed to be transcendence, to measure heaven. Instead, it's accounting with prettier numbers. There's a soft knock, irregular, hesitant. You freeze. Visitors at this hour are like comets, rare, alarming, and usually bad news. The door pushes open to reveal Farid, another night-dwelling scholar burdened with the face of someone who's read too much. His beard catches lamplight like threads of ash. He speaks softly. Have you heard? The question implies catastrophe. You shrug. Catastrophe here is routine. The Wazir's astrologer predicted conflict. He continues. Of course he did. Predicting conflict is like predicting dawn. Eventually, you're right. Farid leans against the doorframe, eyes somewhere between fever and laughter. They might close the observatory. His tone is part joke, part eulogy. You imagine weeks without this room, the only space where silence has mass. You mumble, perhaps they'll convert it into a treasury. Plenty of stars left to count among the taxpayers. Farid doesn't smile. He hands you a scrap of parchment, an incomplete copy of Ptolemy's lost commentary, newly discovered somewhere near Damascus. Gold-laced script swirls across it, arrogant with age. Copy it, he says, before or after the library does. You both know the schedule. When he leaves, the door sighs shut. You unfold the text. The Greek letters dance under the lamplight like drunks at a theological debate. You trace them carefully, feeling absurd reverence for symbols that outlived empires, yet couldn't preserve their own civilization. Knowledge migrates better than people. That's the secret tragedy of history. Parchment travels farther than flesh. The cat jumps onto your desk, scattering some of your notes. It inspects the new parchment, sniffs disdainfully, then sits directly atop Rome's intellectual remains. You mutter a curse, the sort that doubles as prayer. The cat licks its paw, implying it accepts your tribute. You return to writing, the rhythm of quill on skin steady again. Heartbeat, metronome, confession. Somewhere in the distance, thunder finally answers the storm's earlier threat. Wind moans through the shutters like a scholar denied royalties. The room grows cooler. Your lamp hisses. You continue writing, because stopping feels like dying politely. Every stroke an act of minor defiance. If the sky collapses, at least your chart will stay accurate until the dust covers it. The brass astrolabe's reflection distorts your face. Elongated, spectral. A ghost already haunting his own accomplishments. You wonder if posterity will remember names like yours. Probably not. History tends to flatten contributors into collective nouns. The scholars, the translators, the men of science. Titles without oxygen. The real immortality belongs to rulers who sign checks. You dip the pen again. Below, a sudden commotion. Shouts, the clatter of running feet. The sound of surprise. Not panic yet. You pause, listening. Could be a student collapse, or maybe a broken water jar. Then a scream. Definitely not pottery. You move toward the stairwell, peering down through latticed banisters. Shadows flicker. More shouting. You catch phrases, fire, false prophet, lock the doors. The kind of vocabulary that signals the end of funding. Instinct takes over. You snuff the lamp, roll up your charts, press them under a weight of brass. The cat bolts, tail a comet vanishing behind shelves. From below, the smell of burning oil climbs like a jealous god. You've seen fire before. Baghdad builds quickly, burns quicker. You whisper a prayer to any deity who appreciates understatement, not for rescue, but for clarity. If destruction is imminent, at least let it be symmetrical. Minutes pass like vultures. The noise swells, then fades. Someone orders calm in the name of the caliph. Someone else quotes scripture louder. You can't distinguish either side. Heresy and loyalty wear the same cologne here. Gradually the air settles, though it now tastes of smoke and bureaucracy. You relight your lamp, surveying damages, none visible, except the crack in your remaining optimism. You sit again, pen trembling slightly. The outer world may crumble, but Mars continues its slow, arrogant drift westward. You note the coordinates as if they matter more than riots. Perhaps they do. Data survives politics longer than flesh. That's the joke of civilization. Every empire imagines its glory eternal, but the stars keep receipts. Your thoughts wander to the future, our future. You imagine students centuries ahead, streaming knowledge faster than light, yet still mispronouncing the names of those who died for it. Maybe they'll write about you as part of the Islamic Renaissance, a chapter full of adjectives: luminous, tolerant, progressive. They'll skip the part about smoke-stone eyes and government clerks demanding ideological purity before handing over ink. Progress, like beauty, depends on the lighting. Another rustle. Fareed again, face pale under soot. "It's all right now," he pants. "Only a misunderstanding. A bookbinder accused of sorcery. He spelled a charm wrong." You stare. The cosmos wobbles slightly from the absurdity. He'll live? Maybe, Fareed shrugs. All become material evidence. You both share a laugh which feels suspiciously like despair's last hobby. The rest of the night limps forward. Your chart nears completion. The stars obey, indifferent. Ink spreads across parchment, forming constellations of human willpower. Around dawn, the air finally cools. The call to prayer unfurls through mist, like a legal disclaimer. You rise, stretch, regard the city through dusty screens. Baghdad, brilliant and doomed, still pretending the sun rises because it deserves to. You never did believe in destiny. The universe runs on inertia and paperwork. But you continue your observations, because repetition, at least, feels honest. The myth says these chronicles represent faith meeting reason in perfect harmony. You know better. They represent insomnia weaponized into culture. Still, as the first light cuts through the east, your ink shimmers gold for an instant, pretending to justify its existence. May never outlive the next political purging. The stars don't care. Neither do the cats. The pen scratches again, a stubborn heartbeat in the quiet. Ink, brass, and the faint pulse of wind through warped screens. Your constants. There's comfort in their predictability, even if it's the kind of comfort a prisoner might feel counting the bricks in his wall. The work continues because stopping would be admitting the futility you already suspect. And so, you add another careful mark to the chart. Myth versus reality. Everyone loves to picture the golden age of the Abbasid Empire as some enlightened episode of scholarly paradise. Scented oils, calm astronomers in white robes murmuring philosophy between sips of rosewater. The truth smells more like singed parchment, camel sweat, and bureaucratic panic. Enlightenment always leaves scorch marks. The House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah, sounds divine until you realize Hikmah is a luxury subscribed only to those not under investigation this week. You are among them, for now. One light still flickering above Baghdad's sleepless heart. You are sitting under the dome, the topmost chamber of knowledge that everyone below swears they will reach before they die. It's always crowded downstairs. Copyists fighting over quills, translators from India bickering with Nestorian monks about decimal points. But up here, there's nothing except you, the wind, and a brass astrolabe heavy enough to be mistaken for divine judgment. Your shoulders ache from turning it hour after hour, plotting the sky's arithmetic. It's beautiful, yes, but beauty in this world is a silent killer. It keeps you obedient. Below, the city mutters. The Tigris moves like a dark lung, breathing in corruption and breathing out perfume. Poetry floats on balconies, mixed with the smell of goat stew. The scholars of Baghdad like to say knowledge bridges earth and heaven. You, watching the stars through oily glass, suspect the bridge only goes one way, and some emperor already burned the toll receipts. Everyone calls this year 850 CE, the peak. That's how they justify living in ruins. They imagine future historians with neat epithets. The peaks in human history are always drawn by people standing on the corpses of those who slipped halfway up. Tonight you count the movements of Venus, because there's nothing else left to count that won't get you executed. The stars above look timeless, but you know better. Last month you had to recalculate their positions because some assistant used wine diluted with ink as cleaning fluid. Only the smell gave him away, pomegranate sweetness masking burnt copper. He was missing by morning. Someone said he left for Basra. Someone else said the caliph's new librarian needed parchment for shoe linings. Both could be true. Around you, endless scrolls. Greek, Persian, Sanskrit, all translated and retranslated until the gods themselves would struggle to understand their biographies. You used to find that noble, a fellowship of ideas across ages. Now you call it what it is. Cultural identity theft blessed by candlelight. Every phrase of Aristotle or Galen passes through a dozen trembling pens, each translator inserting a little correction, a little theology, a little vengeance. By the end, even Ptolemy sounds vaguely like a postal clerk with a sinus infection. You warm your ink over a small brazier. The charcoal smells like old tax records, because that's exactly what it is. The caliph's administration recycled the empire's unwanted paperwork into fuel for knowledge. There's poetry in the irony if you squint past the smokestains. Every chart you draw owes its light to a burned receipt. Someone once mythologized this era as rational, tolerant, scientific. You'd love to invite them into this attic at midnight, hand them a quill, and ask them to write a single word without coughing. The dust is so thick you taste centuries of good intentions turn to sediment. Every breath feels like inhaling the powdered bones of alphabets. Wisdom, as it turns out, is mostly particulate matter. You glance down at your notes, long columns of numbers describing the temperament of planets. Jupiter, mild and generous, much like a rich man being generous with someone else's money. Mars, hot and cruel, which also describes most ministers. And Venus, forever indulgent, the patron of rumours and linen merchants. You can predict eclipses easily. What you can't predict is the next ideological shift. One wrong horoscope for the air, and your skull becomes an example of medically demonstrable humility. People below still sing of Al-Ma'mun, the caliph who once declared that reason should reign above superstition. They forget how reason ends up enforced by inquisitors who measure orthodoxy with a branding iron. The Mithna, they called it, the Inquisition of the intellect. You recite the formula with bitter precision, created Quran, uncreated Quran, like reciting the recipe for your own execution. And yet the books multiply faster than the decrees. Paper is insubordinate. Fire makes excellent punctuation, though. And governments love punctuation. The cats walk between stacks, silent supervisors of eternity. One black, one curls under your reading bench, tail flicking like a metronome attuned to creeping paranoia. You feed it crumbs of dried fish, though technically rations belong to the quartermaster. The cat's green eyes reflect the candlelight with patient contempt. It understands continuity better than you. Stars collapse into data, empires collapse into anecdotes. Cats, they just keep surviving the footnotes. Sometimes you imagine you're mapping not the heavens but the empire itself. Each star a governor, each orbit a rebellion waiting for apogee. The math works disturbingly well. Mars gains brightness. The province of Khorasan stirs again. Saturn falls dim. Another aging vizier. You wonder if the heavens mirror human idiocy deliberately, or if we simply project ourselves upward, desperate to find cosmic validation for our incompetence. Earlier today, a team of translators argued for hours over a single Greek word, phos. They ended up choosing ne, light, but by then the afternoon sun had melted the wax in their pens, and all decisions blurred into one long reflection of sweat. You watched through the lattice. Scholars, supposedly the Empire's sharpest minds, melting physically and intellectually under identical heat. They looked like candles teaching each other about combustion. You remember when you first came here as a youth, eyes full of idealism, hands still soft, lungs unspoiled by mould? It did, but flickeringly, each glow revealing dust, cracks, and the slow rot of budgets. The lamp of knowledge, your mentor joked, runs on oil, and the oil budget comes from men who sell gossip, not truth. That mentor was purged 2 summers later for owning a suspiciously Greek-looking astrolabe. You inherited it. It works flawlessly, like a ghost continuing someone else's calculations. Tonight, the moon cuts through the high window like a knife sharpened on forgotten prayers. You mark its angle, the slow slide of silver over brass. The faint ticking you hear is actually your heartbeat aligned with fear's metronome. Each beat asks the same question: who will notice your margin note when you're gone? From down the hall rises the murmur of another scholar reciting Euclid to himself. A mantra against madness, a line which lies evenly with the points on itself. His voice breaks like a reed. You finish the phrase for him in your head, because correctness still matters, even when sanity doesn't. The Empire told its sons that knowing geometry could bring them closer to God. Maybe it does, right before they're buried at right angles to the horizon. Your lamp guttered once, twice. You replaced the wick with a sliver of old fabric torn from a petition to the caliph. Irony follows you like smoke. You wonder if the light burns more honestly now. The petition had begged for mercy in some tax dispute. Its ashes illuminate your astronomy. You find that comforting in a severely moral way. From below, echoes, laughter from the guards, the clatter of dishes, faint music from a lute. Ordinary life refuses to respect genius. You envy it. Down there, people can afford ignorance. Up here, every discovery is a threat in waiting. The more you know, the narrower your margin for error. You've started writing smaller, too, tiny, careful letters, as though the ink fears being caught saying something treasonous. Your eyes blur over tables of signs and chords inherited from India. You trace them mechanically, aware that future Europe will someday pat itself on the back for rediscovering these ideas. You'd warn them about the side effects, sleeplessness, persecution, gout, but they wouldn't listen. They never do. Each civilization insists on buying its enlightenment full price, ignoring the used wisdom already shelved. A rumble from the streets, drums, another proclamation, maybe a victory in the provinces, maybe another tax edict. You lean out the window and see a torch procession crossing the bridge. The flames shimmer on the river like migrating stars. For a moment, you half believe Baghdad itself is the reflection, and the real city lies beneath the water, cool and perfect and unreachable, an inverse empire governed by fish with better priorities. When the noise fades, silence returns heavier, like sand settling over a grave. Your pen scratches again, a stubborn heartbeat in the quiet, ink, brass, and the faint pulse of wind through warped screens. Your constants. There's comfort in their predictability, even if it's the kind of comfort a prisoner might feel counting the bricks in his wall. The work continues, because stopping would be admitting the futility you already suspect. And so, you add another careful mark to the chart. Somewhere below, a door slams, the hissing argument of metal and age. Maybe another scholar leaving in fury. Maybe guards becoming interested. You feel the vibration through your desk. Everything in this building listens. Even the cobblestones were once clay, shaped by potters who overheard too much. Walls have memories longer than dynasties. You stretch your back, muscles snapping like taut strings. The astrolabe's engravings sparkle with tiny constellations and fingerprints. You recall polishing it for hours your first day, eager to impress. Now each smudge feels like companionship, brass and skin in long, reluctant collaboration. You whisper the coordinate of Aldebaran, 29 degrees Taurus, just to hear a number that isn't inflating the treasury deficit. A faint scent of musk drifts in, the librarian's incense. It's supposed to purify the air, but mostly gives everyone nosebleeds. Perfume to hide decay. It's basically the Empire's brand identity. You cough, Wipe the red smear on your sleeve and keep writing. The blood dries into small constellations. Somewhere, an astrologer would call that auspicious. You call it Tuesday. Your stomach protests. You've forgotten dinner again. Bread from noon, stiff as parchment. You chew anyway, imagining you're consuming someone's dull thesis on metaphysics. It tastes about the same. Hunger is faith's companion. Both believe in nourishment that never arrives. You sip a little water from your copper cup, but it tastes faintly of ink. So be it. You're drinking your own handwriting, fitting symmetry. A whisper reaches your ear, real or imagined, you can't tell. The ceiling timbers sigh with the desert breeze. Sometimes you imagine they repeat the scholars' conversations, slow translations into wood. All knowledge is temporary. One beam seems to creak. Except splinters. You chuckle quietly because the architecture is getting philosophical. Madness or literacy? Hard to distinguish anymore. When sleep threatens, you read random sentences from whatever scroll lies nearest. Tonight, it's a Persian commentary on optics. The author suggests that sight depends on rays leaving the eyes, not entering them. You respect the confidence. It reminds you of every minister you've ever met. They all think illumination starts with them. You jot a marginal note. Perhaps blindness is the ultimate inward vision. Immediately regret writing it. Someone reviewing your notes could interpret that as satire, which it is. Exactly the problem. You shut the scroll, extinguish the candle's top ash with your daggers flat. The blade reflects your face like a careless witness. Every year, a little more line, a little less patience. The Empire's radiation ages everyone unevenly. You tuck the dagger away under the chart. Security, but also punctuation. From the far side of the roof, the call to prayer begins. At this hour, the sound feels misplaced. Muezzin declaring divine magnitude into a half-asleep city whose only devotion is insomnia. The tone echoes in the bronze instruments, shivering across your calculations. For a moment, mathematics and faith briefly harmonize. Vibration through metal resembling worship through exhaustion. Then silence again. Back to numbers no God will bless with accuracy. You glance out once more. Clouds crawl from the west. Dry, skeletal ones shaped like ribs. You imagine they belong to the sky's corpse, half buried in the horizon. Scholars will debate that metaphor in 300 years. By then, Baghdad's own ribs will be visible. You decide not to write that down. Prophecy is career suicide, disguised as insight. The cat wakes, stretches with shameless privilege, and leaps onto your chart. Its paw smears a streak of ink across an entire constellation. You sigh, not angry. The stars, according to you, were already smudges. Good work, you tell the animal. You've corrected Ptolemy. It yawns, which counts as peer review, and settles again. Sometimes you send notes down to the scriptoria, tiny scraps folded into replacement scrolls, anonymous aphorisms, just to see if anyone's reading for meaning or merely for pay. Things like, truth has a half-life shorter than candle wax. They usually end up recopied into philosophy compilations under the names of long-dead Greeks. You take pride in being plagiarized by the past. Time is a generous thief. Your colleagues worship the idea of eternity, but you've learned eternity is just bureaucracy without deadlines. Every cosmic table must be rechecked, recalculated, recopied. Not because truth changes, but because ink fades faster than devotion. You've developed a theory that every civilization eventually collapses under the weight of its own footnotes. The empire will drown not in blood, but in citations. A gentle knock. You freeze. Another. Slow, deliberate. You hide the marginal note about blindness under your robe. Enter, you whisper, instantly regretting it. An apprentice pokes his head in, barely more than a child, eyes enormous with fear and admiration. He holds a tray, a fresh candle, and a small slice of melon. Gift from the vizier, he mutters. You scan the melon for poison, the candle for listening devices, old habits. You nod and take them. The boy lingers, staring at your charts. Master, do the stars care what we do? You laugh before you can stop yourself. Flat, unkind. Only about gravity, you answer. He nods solemnly, misunderstanding completely, and vanishes. You taste the melon. It's sour, probably imported too early. Imported knowledge, imported fruit. The same impulse of impatience. You toss the rind to the cat, which sniffs it, blesses it with disinterest, and returns to sleep. Truly divine behaviour. Shifting again to your desk, you trace the meridian line. The pen seems heavier now, as if history itself leans on your hand. You recall the first time you looked through an astrolabe lens and thought you saw God blink. Now you know it was just dust in your eye. Enlightenment hurts more once you realise it's mostly debris entering the cornea. Outside, a gust shakes the shutters. The air smells of coming rain, a rare luxury. You recall the engineer who tried to record rainfall as a divine metric. He was laughed out of court. Water, they said, is for bathing or drowning, not calculating. You smile. He would have liked you. The thunder never comes. Clouds pass, arrogant as ministers on parade. The rains promise another deferred discovery. You climb the narrow steps to the roof, candle in hand, ignoring regulations about open flames near manuscripts. Rules are just suggestions written by survivors. Up there, the city yawns below. Thousands of rooftops glittering with lamplight reflections. The aroma of late-night bread mixing with sewage. Devotion tangled with rot. You feel briefly omniscient, then remember that omniscience is the prelude to blame. The Caliph trusts astronomers to read omens conveniently. Victory requires the alignment of planets. Defeats require your resignation letters. You laugh again. The cat down below answers with a precise meow timed to cosmic mockery. A shooting star crosses the southern sky, a perfect line, brief and conclusive. You instinctively reach for your slate to note its coordinates, then pause. Why bother? What's another line of fire against the background of perpetual combustion? Maybe the heavens just vent gas like the Empire does, a regular purge to avoid explosion. System maintenance disguised as beauty. You descend back into the attic before the candle dies. The air feels heavier than before, the smell of ink-like tar. Somewhere the wind has blown soot from another neighbourhood fire. Probably a bakery, maybe a bookstore. In Baghdad, those are often the same thing. You realise, suddenly, that tomorrow's sunrise will illuminate something missing, some volume borrowed by eternity, never to be returned. You hope it's one of the medical treatises. The astronomy shelves are already too thin. You sit again, pick up the pen. The nib scratches that same obstinate rhythm. Survive, survive, survive. You sketch a final chart aligning the moon's path with yesterday's tax announcement. There's uncanny symmetry between celestial cycles and fiscal exploitation. Perhaps both are governed by identical constants: gravity and greed. You label it discreetly, Experiment 12. Future historians will misinterpret it as a love poem, perfect. The night deepens toward pale indigo, that colour of exhausted revelation. You lean back, joints aching like old equations. The bookshelf shadow across your lap looks like the bars of a cage designed by geometry itself. You smile at the design flaw of the universe. Knowledge demanding captivity is its price. You hear footsteps again, heavier, armoured. Not the apprentice this time. You blow out the candle. Wait. Voices murmur beyond the door. The words blur through the wood. Inspection. Unauthorized materials. You feel an absurd calm. If they find the manuscript from Byzantium you've been secretly annotating, you'll be questioned. At worst, retired permanently. At best, transferred to surveying irrigation, astronomy's rural exile. You tuck the scroll under your chart, loosen your pen's grip. Maybe you think they'll forget this room exists. People do forget. That's the foundation of empire, systematic amnesia. After a tense eternity, 2 minutes, they leave. Maybe your guardian cats bribed them. You breathe again, every exhale shaking the accumulated dust of unburned fates. You relight the candle with trembling fingers. The flame returns, stubbornly ordinary, like consciousness itself after near sleep. Time slides past. Eventually dawn's grey fingers push through the lattice. They touch your charts, making the ink shimmer like coagulated morning. You realize you've drawn all night without once looking at the clock or the water jar. The work devoured its maker again. Congratulations, you've become a function. And yet, there's tenderness in that doom. The universe runs on self-consuming dedication. Even the stars die producing light for others' illusions. You tidy the desk automatically, stacking scrolls by language, then by danger level. Greek goes under Arabic, Persian under both. Sanskrit you hide entirely. It provokes too many debates about zero, and the court hates zeros unless they're on currency. You wash the pen, collect the ink sediment, store it carefully. Everything precious now consists of reusable residues. Footsteps again, lighter now. Morning guards changing shift. Through the shutter gap you watch the first traders crossing the bridge, leading camels loaded with indigo, paper, sugar, and rumour. The house of wisdom will open soon like a mouth expecting praise. You'll vanish into its throat, along with every other expendable intellect. And tonight, when darkness reclaims the sky, you'll climb back into this attic to continue marking eternity with an air of desperate professionalism. Before leaving the desk, you glance once more at the chart. So many tiny circles, arcs, annotations, worlds folded into lines. If someone centuries hence found this paper, they'd think it art, not survival. You decide not to correct them. Let them have the myth. Reality is terrible branding. You pull on your robe, step toward the staircase, pause. The cat meows authoritative objection. You look back. It sits atop the astrolabe, owning it with priestly indifference. For a moment you imagine it as the real astronomer, you merely its secretary. The thought delights you. Every great civilization requires its quiet absurdities, and perhaps cats are humanity's punishment for aspiring to understand the cosmos. The draperies at the window stir again. Daylight, relentless, indifferent. You exhale the stale air of the attic and descend the narrow spiral, carrying the faint smell of ink with you like a confession. The stairs creak hymns of fatigue. Halfway down, you hear someone reading aloud from a new translation of Plato's Republic. The irony makes you grin. Nothing defines empire like quoting tyrants to justify tolerance. When you finally step into the courtyard, the sun assaults you with the authority of a tax officer. The mosaic tiles shimmer painfully bright. Scribes bustle between rows, carrying stacks of parchments like offerings. Everywhere, pigeons define gravity by defying it. You feel transparent, a ghost crossing an institution, addicted to its own legend. Someone greets you, an archivist you half know. Long night of stars, he jokes. You nod, resisting the urge to explain orbital mechanics as therapy. He wouldn't understand. He still believes those stars ensure the Empire's destiny. You know better. They only mark time until the next war, the next purge, the next flood that will turn this whole magnificent library into driftwood for future archaeologists. You walk toward the gate. The guard barely looks up. Intelligence has low street value at sunrise. Outside awaits the clamour of Baghdad awakening, merchants hammering open stalls, water sellers announcing prices, beggars competing with poets for attention. The smell, spice, sewage, sweat collapses eras into one shared human perfume. Somewhere a donkey brays in perfect counterpoint to your internal narrative. Life continues, unedited. Yet the idea of the myth persists. Tourists of tomorrow will speak of this house of wisdom as paradise lost, conveniently forgetting the salary disputes, the mildew, the daily fear of offending a verse. They'll write poems about this era's enlightenment, while never mentioning how many lamps burned the skin of their keepers. You imagine them centuries ahead, sipping coffee over your dusty chart, pretending the stars once whispered secrets to brave men in silken robes. You almost envy them. Myths are mercy. Before disappearing into the crowd, you glance back once more. From outside, the house gleams, a fortress of intellect, the Empire's crowned boast. From inside, You know it's just layered anxiety supported by good architecture. But perhaps that's all a civilization is. Collective neurosis baked into stone until it looks noble from a distance. You smile, a private heresy, and start walking. Above, the sky already dims in the heat. Despite being morning, stars retreat, embarrassed to have been trusted so much. You whisper a farewell to them anyway, knowing you'll see them again tonight through warped glass, still indifferent, still the best company you can afford. The ink stains on your fingers have dried into constellations of their own, little galaxies of human stubbornness. You rub them, but they won't come off. So you keep walking, part of a myth still under revision, into a city that will someday be forgotten by everyone except archaeologists and trivia enthusiasts. The brass astrolabe waits upstairs, catching dust, still measuring something enormous and meaningless. The cat will sit beside it, patient, hungry, immortal as bureaucracy. And the stars, they move precisely as calculated, which is to say, without reason, without mercy, perfectly. So you keep walking, part of a myth still under revision, into a city that will someday be forgotten by everyone except archaeologists and trivia enthusiasts. The brass astrolabe waits upstairs, catching dust, still measuring something enormous and meaningless. The cat will sit beside it, patient, hungry, immortal as bureaucracy. And the stars? They move precisely as calculated, which is to say, without reason, without mercy, perfectly. You leave the library behind, though leave is generous. No one really escapes a monument built for immortality. You descend the marble stairs that already creak like tired philosophers. Every step is a confession. That knowledge was never meant to comfort, only to accumulate. The sand outside scratches the worn arches like an old creditor reminding the city of unpaid debts. Baghdad breathes around you, if it can still be called breathing when the lungs are made of lamps, scholars, and arguments. Myth says this is the Golden Age, the empire of Abbasids, shining so hard you could burn your corneas on its wisdom. Reality says it's an age of paperwork, blood sugar crashes, and misfiled miracles. You look back once, half expecting the enormous dome of the House of Wisdom to just evaporate under its own arrogance, but it stays, solid as insomnia. Out in the streets, the smell of ink and sweat mixes into something close to theology. A hawker shouts prices for dates. He might as well be declaring war on the entire Silk Road. The Caliph's palace looms far off, its lamps trying too hard to imitate stars, the same way every dynasty tries to imitate eternity. Somewhere in those walls, bureaucrats are deciding what counts as knowledge and what counts as sedition. Same difference. You pass a poet muttering verses about divine love into his cup of watered wine. He notices you staring, and smiles the universal smile of someone who's already pawned their soul for art supplies. The joke, of course, is that wisdom comes in shipping crates. Delegations from all directions, Greek, Persian, Hindu, Syriac, arrive every season like sponsored content. Translators queue up with wax tablets covered in equations nobody understands but everyone admires. You can smell the envy, old parchment and ambition. A boy runs by carrying scrolls twice his size. You can't tell if he's delivering ideas or just exercising imperial propaganda. Up there, on your way to nowhere, a comet crawls along the night. You remember how many clerks tried to define its meaning, drafting equations that could outlive their sanity. You remember how many lives were spent parsing the difference between motion and destiny, and how many careers ended simply by getting that difference wrong. You walk along the canal where boats full of papyrus drift toward workshops that reek of goatskin glue. The water is black and still, reflecting the city like a guilty conscience. Myth says the Tigris carries ideas downstream. Reality says it carries waste, ink spills, and a few scribes who fell asleep too close to the edge. One fisherman waves at you, his net tangled with pages of geometry, and shouts something about divine symmetry. You nod, because the alternative would be admitting the pattern looks suspiciously like bureaucracy. There's a restlessness tonight. The empire hums with its own heartbeat, too large to be human. Gold floods the market, crushed under its own shimmer. You hear gossip that the Caliph ordered a new observatory, one so precise it could track angels, if only angels would file proper coordinates. The astronomers celebrate, already drafting grant proposals. You envy their optimism. They still believe eternity can be graphed. You find yourself crossing a bridge built so delicately it should exist only in memory. The lamps hanging along its side make every shadow look like a philosopher sneezing in despair. Across the river, the poorer districts sprawl, mud walls, tangled alleys, fatal smells. You remember reading tax records describing this neighborhood as resource potential. That's polite code for someday innovation will eat you. You keep walking anyway, because even cynicism has momentum. The air tastes faintly of copper, maybe from the mint nearby, stamping coins that declare faith in the market's immortality. Every empire eventually mints its own myth, and every coin is an act of theology disguised as economy. A guard eyes you suspiciously, though your robe identifies you as one of the quiet ones, the readers, not the rebels. He looks disappointed, probably hoping for a story worth remembering. The further you wander, the more the myth frays. A scholar hurries by with a pile of scrolls, muttering that Aristotle was misunderstood and that Plato owed the Persians an apology. Nobody listens. Debates here are renewable energy. Somewhere, translators argue about the correct word for soul. They'll finish by inventing new grammar just to postpone conclusions. History will call it progress. You pass an inn. Inside, merchants drink, arguing about whether spices or algorithms will make them richer. One swears he saw scholars testing lenses that can see the fiery breath of stars. Another boasts that he's selling ground sapphire to those same scholars so they can burn theories more efficiently. The bartender quietly counts the days until the next invasion. You smile at the absurd normalcy of it. Every epoch that declares itself eternal somehow makes petty cash the most eternal thing. The night cools. You head toward the edges of the city, where walls thin into mere suggestions. On the horizon, desert meets silence. You think about how civilizations end, not with drama, but with paperwork left unsigned. Somewhere in that inevitability, you find comfort. Maybe because you finally understand that knowledge isn't light, it's dust pretending to be memory. You stop at a small shrine built for travelers. Inside hangs an inscription that promises wisdom to those who read patiently. The letters shimmer oddly. They've been rewritten too many times, each calligrapher correcting someone else's truth. It feels personal, like the empire whispering to its future self, "Forgive me. I didn't mean to last this long." Your fingers still sting from the ink stains. You rub them again, but they won't come off, as if the words themselves refuse to forget you. You realize those spots will outlive the very libraries that produced them. Skin becomes archive. By dawn, the city changes colour. The towers blush under a pale haze, pretending innocence. Scholars return to the library with bags of bread and quotation marks. The cat climbs to its perch and yawns, still waiting for someone to feed it a revelation. You stand outside the gates that will be described centuries later in textbooks as centers of global learning. The irony is that none of those textbooks will mention the broken lamps, the unpaid apprentices, or the mildew eating whole alphabets. You think about myth again. The myth says Baghdad was paradise until barbarians found it. Reality says paradise died mostly of overthinking and accounting errors. You'd like to believe that the collapse will be tragic, noble, cinematic, perhaps full of flames and poetry. It won't. It'll be paperwork and drainage problems, like everything else. The first call to prayer rises through the mist, wavering like an uncertain memory. You expect transcendence but get civic noise. The muezzin's voice echoes against the dome of the House of Wisdom, turning sacred truth into acoustics. You listen because disbelief has its own ritual. Back inside, the librarians resume their endless dance with oblivion. They sort manuscripts, dust shelves, argue over whether numbers can sin. You join them for a moment, because inertia always wins. Someone asks where the latest translation of Euclid went. Nobody knows. Maybe the cat ate it. Maybe history did. a younger scholar tries to compute the length of eternity using fractions. You watch him scribble until his candle sputters out. He sighs, muttering that the cosmos must be rational because otherwise his thesis would collapse. You don't have the heart to tell him that rationality and collapse are synonyms in this building. Later, an emissary from the caliph arrives demanding reports. How many books copied? How many theories proven useful? The librarians panic. Usefulness was never part of the design. They fake numbers, invent authors, rename footnotes as miracles. The emissary leaves satisfied, which is proof that delusion scales nicely. You wander to the topmost dome again, where the astrolabe waits. Its surface has dulled, but its engravings still whisper geometry that makes reality look tentative. You rotate it slightly, though it no longer aligns with anything known. The stars above continue their impersonation of harmony. You think about the first astronomers who believed that understanding motion meant taming fate. They died poorer but smugger. It occurs to you that myths are just bureaucracies of memory, forms filled in by survivors trying not to look guilty. The Abbasid Golden Age will be filed under enlightenment, though half its light came from burning doubt. Later generations will worship the word Baghdad, like a password to lost perfection. You can already hear future historians murmuring, "Why did it end?" The honest answer, because it began. You lean on the balcony. Below, camels snort, impatient, under their loads of wisdom. Somewhere, traders argue over interest rates. Somewhere, poets species hop into mystics. Somewhere, a child learns to read just to misunderstand everything magnificently. You realize history doesn't walk. It stumbles forward, bleeding irony. Your mind drifts. You imagine centuries peeling away. Mongols, Ottomans, colonizers, archaeologists. Each one arrives promising restoration. Each one leaves promising documentation. The story shrinks until it fits comfortably inside footnotes and museum glass. Somehow scholars will one day guess that you stood here, calculating the alignment of stars and jokes. The cat brushes your ankle, meows like a bureaucratic memo, waiting for your signature approval. You laugh quietly because paperwork, even in heaven, would sound like that. Outside the library a merchant chants, "Books for sale, words immortal." He's wrong. Neither words nor books are immortal. Only hunger is. The scrolls he sells will end up recycled into contracts, wrapped around fish, or buried with scribes who thought they mattered. You consider buying one, then remember that owning wisdom is the same as hoarding expiration dates. In the courtyard, a child is learning the alphabet, tracing letters into dust. Each gust of wind erases his progress roughly 3 times per word. You watch him laugh at the futility of it. He'll grow up and call this method empirical learning. The empire will call it efficiency. Hours pass. The brass astrolabe catches new light as the sun rises, mockingly precise. You try to measure your own pulse against celestial rotation, a trick you once read about in a manual for mystics who despised metaphors. It doesn't work. The stars ignore your heartbeat. The instrument ignores both. Measurement was never meant to heal. You remember the first time you saw this library, its great dome glittering like a rationalized mirage, the scholars buzzing like bees who doubted flowers. You thought it eternal then. Now you see it as fragile geometry pretending confidence. Somewhere in the archives, paper mold spreads quietly, establishing republics of decay. The cat migrates to the ladder, climbs halfway, stops, stares at you as if questioning your thesis. You wish you had one. All you have are observations, most of them uncomfortable. Like that moment when wisdom begins to stink like old ink, or when every philosopher secretly behaves like an accountant, counting arguments instead of debts. It's strange, you think, how civilization defined progress by its ability to catalogue its own boredom. You glance around, thousands of scrolls, thousands of explanations for why existence might matter, none entirely convincing. You could burn half of them and nobody would notice, except the next budget committee. Outside, voices swell, students reciting verses, merchants bargaining, horse hooves echoing through metaphysical fog. Life continues, gloriously unaware that it's already history. You exhale, wondering if peace might just be another form of apathy. Then, silence again. Absolute, like grammar before creation. You realize the entire building hums faintly, maybe from wind under the dome, maybe from genius decaying into memory. That's the real sound of the Abbasid Empire at its peak. Success buzzing itself toward exhaustion. You walk the corridors one last time, the air thick with lamp smoke, the flavour of melted bronze. Every bust and mosaic you pass carries the same expression of polite despair, faces trapped in perfection they didn't ask for. Somewhere behind a door, scribes cough. Somewhere else, someone lectures about divine geometry to an audience of dust motes. The empire educates until entropy graduates. A sudden gust through the window brings desert grit onto your desk, coating your notes. You wipe it off, but it returns instantly. The sand is persistent. It's history auditioning for the role of extinction. You laugh softly. The irony is impeccable. The greatest empire reduced to aggressive minerals. You climb the staircase again, drawn by habit more than curiosity. The astrolabe waits. The cat, of course, waits too. They are constants. One mechanical, one biological, both misunderstood. You set your hand on the brass rim. Feel it cold despite the sunrise. The metal has recorded centuries of touch, argument, calculation. It has more fingerprints than truth. You look up. The stars fade but continue their relentless nonsense. Every coordinate precise, every purpose absent. You feel that familiar cynicism settling like dust into the creases of understanding. You realize you're part of a chain that mistakes measuring for meaning. Myth versus reality. It began like that, didn't it? The myth of enlightenment against the reality of exhaustion. People will someday call this the cradle of science, worship the idea of progress brewed out of sand. Maybe they'll picture you, ink-stained, tired, noble in your futility. They'll write essays proving that the Abbasid era was paradise. They'll forget you also cursed the lamp smoke, the endless revisions, the bureaucratic miracles. Centuries from now, the House of Wisdom will burn, finally closing its unpaid account. The astrolabe will survive, slightly dented, displayed in a museum where children will press faces against glass panels, admiring its precision. They'll imagine divine purpose behind its lines. The curator will explain celestial coordinates, avoiding the part about lost manuscripts and unpaid apprentices. Progress prefers selective memory. And the cat, someone will paint it in miniature, sitting beside scrolls as emblem of patience and scholarship. Nobody will realize it was mostly hungry. Every civilization stylizes hunger into virtue when it runs out of answers. You wonder absurdly if the empire knew it was peaking. Maybe it suspected. Maybe the scribes noticed how recycling parchment became common, how enthusiasm costs more ink than sense. Decline doesn't announce itself. It footnotes itself to death. Down below, laundry flaps on balconies like surrender flags disguised as domestic necessity. The smell of breakfast floats through alleys. Bread, oil, and stubborn hope. You taste air that's half divine, half bureaucratic. Both flavours dull with repetition. You return to your seat near the window. The cat joins you, curling around itself like a question mark that refuses conclusion. The astrolabe gleams weakly, pretending purpose. You dip your pen, though you no longer know what to write. Perhaps a final notation. All precision is procrastination. You write it, then smile. That sentence will confuse future historians beautifully. Your eyes drift to the horizon, where morning dissolves into mathematics. You whisper that every empire constructs its own light, not to illuminate, but to hide decay under glamour. You notice your ink-stained fingers again. Tiny flags of surrender. You rub them once more. Still they cling, stubborn like memory, insolent like truth. You realize then that myth and reality were never opposites. They're co-authors. The myth provides purpose. Reality adds absurdity for balance. Together they form history, the only genre guaranteed to end in irony. The library creaks, as if affirming that thought. Somewhere a scholar sneezes, disrupting dust patterns arranged since midnight. You laugh because that sneeze is the most honest commentary of the day. Outside, Baghdad continues its performance, caravans departing, songs rising, prayers competing with market shouts. Every corner vibrates with the illusion of permanence, yet you can already feel its edges cracking, the way perfection starts to sweat under observation. You look again at the astrolabe, brass catching the light, measuring nothing useful, eternal in its futility. It embodies everything glorious and pathetic about knowledge, meticulous, irrelevant, indestructible only because nobody asks it to do anything dangerous. The cat stretches, yawns, glances at you with bureaucratic condescension, as if approving your resignation. You finally understand that wisdom is not knowing, but enduring. The empire, with all its scholars and poets and clerks, endures exactly like that, elegantly, pointlessly, magnificently. You breathe one last equation of air. It smells of sand, ink, and fatigue. You think about the distant future, the archaeologists and trivia enthusiasts who'll someday reconstruct this place from shards and guesses. They'll call it the pinnacle of civilization and miss the stink of mold, the boredom of miracles, the pulse of hunger. You stand, stretch, and begin to walk. Down corridors lined with forgotten formulas, past shelves weighted with promises. Your footsteps echo, identical to those of every generation that believed walking was progress. Outside the library, the city waits under the indifferent sun. The same sun that will someday bleach its ruins into footnotes. No trumpets, no tragedy, just erosion and tax records. You step into that light carrying nothing but ink stains and cynical amusement. So you keep walking, ghost among stories, myth and revision. The brass astrolabe remains upstairs, catching dust, still measuring something enormous and meaningless. The cat sits beside it, patient, hungry, immortal as bureaucracy. And the stars, they move precisely as calculated, which is to say, without reason, without mercy, perfectly. You watch them vanish into daylight, knowing precision will never explain hunger. The myth ends here, whispering that knowledge was salvation. Reality answers dryly that salvation was always just another calculation error. And that, finally, is wisdom.